All right. Welcome, everyone. So the title of my talk is it's a bit of a mouthful. It's the Democratization of Initiation at Burning Man, a cosmotheandric inquiry. Burning Man really inspired this talk, but there's a lot of background that I want to unpack for you. So I'm not going to talk specifically about what I think Burning Man is allowing to flower in our culture or our counterculture until the end of the talk. I want to begin by unpacking a few concepts, one of which is this notion of a social imaginary, which is a phrase that the philosopher Charles Taylor coined, and that's really starting to catch on in sociology, just as another way of talking about what are sometimes called worldviews, cosmologies, cultures. I like the term social imaginary. For one, just because I'm writing my dissertation on the imagination, so it speaks to me, and it seems to give us an understanding of that which is underlying the conscious ideas and beliefs that a culture has about itself. A social imaginary is, it has to do with what Alfred North Whitehead called the imaginative background, which is sort of unconscious, and it structures our beliefs and our practices before we know consciously what those beliefs and practices are. So it comes before what we would call our worldview and how we would describe what our worldview is. The social imaginary is beneath that. It operates at a sort of subterranean level. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Then I want to unpack another concept called Cosmopolitics, which is something that comes out of Whitehead's work also, but has really been developed by two contemporary thinkers, French sociologist of science and philosopher Bruno Latour, and another French philosopher, Isabelle Stengers. So this notion of cosmopolitics is an attempt to break down the dichotomy between nature and culture, between society and human society and the rest of the universe. It's the idea that all of the universe is, in some ways, a cultural phenomenon, that there's learning taking place at the level of molecules, cells, animals, and of course at the level of human beings, but it's not unique to human beings. Then I'm going to talk about initiation, what that has meant historically for the ancients, and how it continues to inform our culture today. And then I'm going to get into Burning Man and try to tie all of these ideas together. So we'll begin with this notion of the social imaginary. As I said, it was coined by Charles Taylor. It's not the ideas or the theories that a society has about itself. It takes place at a deeper, often unconscious, imaginative level. There's another theorist, Cornelius Castoriadis, who just so happened to discover last week, because Jake Sherman left a book in the PCC office, and I cracked it open, and there's an essay about exactly what I'm talking about today. So he says that human history is in its essence defined by imaginary creation. And this isn't the same as like the social construction of reality. It's not just, as I said, about human history. This is what you could call a cosmo-historical process. And I think what this notion points to is that imagination is in some ways a natural phenomenon. It's not a creation of human beings. In some sense, the imagination is what created the human being. You know, the cosmic imagination or the divine imagination. So Castoriadis goes on in that essay I mentioned, which was about Greek and modern democracies. He says, "Every society must maintain itself, preserve itself, defend itself. It is menaced by itself, its own imaginary, which can rise up and challenge institutions as they already exist." So in other words, every society has this imaginary, this basic unconscious set of structures that are informing its worldview. And while that set of structures will inform the mainstream culture, it will also inform the countercultures that emerge to challenge the dominant culture. I think Burning Man is an example of how there's both this process of rebellion against the mainstream, but it's also carrying forward some of the same ideals that the modern West has always held sacred. You know, individual expression, freedom, you know, this empowerment of the individual to create the world from the sort of inner spark of their own spirit. I mean, this is taken to an extreme. Burning Man is almost less than a countercultural event than a hypercultural event. It's bringing to fruition some of the best parts of the modern Western psyche, I think. It's also different in other ways, which I'll get to. So another really helpful concept in understanding a social imaginary, especially a democratic social imaginary, is this difference that Castoriadis marks between a heteronomous society and an autonomous society. Heteronomous societies, they believe that their law comes from outside, from something other, heteronomous. And this could be God, this could be reason with a capital R, this could be the market with a capital M. And in these societies, there's no consciousness of the fact that history is an imaginative process of creation. The society isn't autonomous in the sense that it realizes that it makes its own laws. An autonomous society knows this, and they consciously participate in the questioning and the interrogation of their laws anew in each generation. So there's, you know, always going to be an inheritance from the past, but a heteronomous society doesn't question that inheritance. An autonomous society does, and is forced then, you know, to constantly, you know, call into question its very reason for existing. And it comes from within instead of being imposed from without. In a heteronomous society, there's something we could call a closure of signification, which means that the structure of our language and our basic way of communicating with ourselves and with whatever it is that is informing the law, be it God, reason, the market, that structure, any question we can ask within that structure has an answer that's also within that structure. So there's no way to break out of the closure of signification within a heteronomous society. So the question becomes, how do you rupture this closure? And I think you could say that one of the places where such a rupture began was in ancient Greece. And it emerged with philosophy and with democracy. You know, a democracy knows that it makes its own laws, as I said, and it's not afraid to put them into question continually. But there's this paradox now, because, you know, Greece was where democracy first flowered, but it was also where philosophy first flowered, and, you know, perhaps the most important philosopher in history, Plato, who Alfred North Whitehead said, you know, all of Western philosophy is but the footnotes to Plato. You know, there are other important figures, obviously, but he's really central. He was pretty hostile to democracy, it would appear at first sight. And, you know, he despised democracy because in a democracy, as it was defined in Athens, there's this understanding that it's based on opinion, and the opinion of the majority is what will determine the laws. The Greek word is doxa, opinion. And Castoriadis writes that the postulate of the prima facie equivalence of all doxae, of all opinions, is the sole justification of majority rule. And so for Plato, if you look at in the Republic, he has this hierarchy of knowledge, and opinion is pretty low on that hierarchy. And so because Plato didn't value just the opinion of the rabble, so to speak, he didn't think that democracy was a valid way of government. But I would argue that that Plato, this doesn't necessarily make Plato a totalitarian thinker, as he's often been accused of being. He was simply against a polity that was ruled by popular opinion, that was ruled by pop culture, you could say. Because for him, pop culture is a culture that hasn't been initiated into these deeper structures of reality and of the universe, the ideas, the forms. And a culture that was initiated, or individuals in a culture that were initiated into this deeper layer of reality, the ideas and the forms, would model their polis after that ideal realm. And for Plato, it was the heavens, it was the stars and the planets, and their orderly motion through the sky that should inform the way we structure our society. Because, on Earth, in the polis, if it's just our opinions and we're all sort of, facing each other, there's this sort of, chaos that can emerge. Like, this is my opinion, that's your opinion. How do we arbitrate between these? Well, there's the majority rule, but we all share the same sky. And Plato thought, by looking at the sky and looking at the perfect order of their motions mathematically, we could be informed by something that's transpersonal and not simply personal, as personal opinions would be. So you could say that Plato was a cosmopolitical thinker, meaning that he sought a society that was shaped by wisdom, and one of the ways that wisdom is reflected is in the motions of the heavens. So he felt that the stars should be the ethical teachers of humanity, and to inform our common life together. So now a little bit about the notion of initiation. In our community, I think we're all pretty familiar with what this word might mean. I think for the ancients, and still today, it has a lot to do with an encounter with death, and with the death-rebirth mystery, and with passing through that threshold where, the physical body dies, the physical senses are no longer operative. And for Plato, who was an initiate into the Eleusinian mysteries, it was death that provided insight into the eternal nature of the soul. And in modern culture, death has sort of become a profanity. We don't like to look at it. We don't like to talk about it. We run away from it. We do everything we can, medically and cosmetically, to cover it up, to avoid it, to prevent it. While I think in the ancient world, nothing was more sacred than death. Death was the portal where the wisdom of eternity, would pour through. If only we could, prepare ourselves to see that. And this is what initiation was about. We don't know much about what actually took place at the Eleusinian mysteries, because the initiates were sworn to secrecy. However, various tidbits snuck out here and there. The first tragic poet, Aeschylus, was accused of telling the secrets in one of his plays. He denied that and claimed he wasn't an initiate, but he lived in Eleusis, and it seems that he did have some knowledge of what was going on in this mystery cult, and it seems to have something to do with it has to do with the myth of Persephone, who travels to the underworld and meets Hades and ends up victorious and ends up the queen of heaven, the queen of hell, when all is said and done, and it has to do with the process of when all is said and done, and it has to do with the process of fertility of vegetation, I think. And on the level of plants, you can really see this death rebirth mystery taking place, and the movement from seed, to flowering, to fruiting, to seed again. And that the seed is in some sense the carcass of the living plant, but it was understood as soon as the agricultural revolution took place that the seed is actually containing a new life, and that there's a continuity from the death of the plant to its rebirth. So it's clear on the plant realm that there's this death-rebirth continuity. In the animal realm, I think it's more difficult to recognize that, which is why these initiatory processes were necessary to remind the soul. You know, animals, they have anima, they're ensouled, and I think especially for human beings, there's this, you know, as we know so well from Stan and Rick's work, there's this birth trauma, and Plato wrote quite a bit about the trauma of birth and how it caused the soul to forget its origin and eternity. And so these initiatory cults were probably assisted by some sort of psychedelic. There are many theories that anything from mushrooms that may have been growing in the fields to a fungus called ergot that would grow on the rye. And you know, some depictions are that they would take one of these substances, go into a cave, and have this sort of, you know, the priests and the priestesses would create this sort of dramatic setting where they would try to scare the initiates in this dark place, make them think that demons were surrounding them in the cave, and then just when they were, you know, you know, people to be initiated were, you know, completely freaking out, feeling like the world was closing in around them, like, you know, sort of BPM-2 space, they would then, you know, provide a light at the end of the tunnel, and then it would open up into this glorious revelation where the walls would be painted with, you know, these beautiful scenes of you know, of heaven and of it would give them a sense of unity with the cosmos, and so they would, you know, move from thinking that death was, that they were dying and that was the end, to being open to this new expanse, which was supposed to inform them and remind their soul that this is what will happen when you die, and that you have died before as well. So Eleusis was kind of considered for the ancients this dream realm, because the mysteries what took place there, I think, every spring. Hesiod referred to this sort of mythical city of Elsion, which sounds a lot like Esalen, actually. But it's the place where he said the happy dead live. You know, happy dead, in other words, they die and realize that the soul lives on. And Hesiod said that this city of Elsion, this mythical city, was located at the western ocean at the edge of the earth. And I think, you know, symbolically, Elsion, it's been used by poets, you know, for hundreds of years, just to represent this mythical city. It's kind of like Eden. And in many ways, Burning Man is a kind of dream city, like Elsion. It only exists for 1 week a year, and, you know, after that week, it's gone. It's a desert again, and it has that very temporary feel to it, that it's almost not quite real, but I think it provides a place for the dreamers of our culture to go and try to imagine a new world, and to try to make it permanent, not in the physical space where it exists for a week, but permanent in their soul as a reminder of what, you know, the default world could be if they fully internalize the initiatory experience that takes place there. So, you know, as I said, Plato wasn't very impressed with democracy that was based on just doxa, based on opinion. But I think this was because, you know, a democracy without initiation would lead to misguided opinions about what is of true value. A culture that thinks that death is the end and that all we get is this one life is going to value different things than a culture that understands that we are one generation, and that the next generation, and, you know, generations upon generations, are in some sense carrying forward the same spirit that is existing within us now. You know, so it's one thing, you know, to base the ethics of a civilization on the idea that we should prepare for the next generations, and, you know, that could motivate some people to be more ecologically conscious. But, you know, I think a deeper understanding and initiation into the reality of reincarnation would make that easier for people to understand. Why should I really preserve the earth? Well, because I'll be here again. I want to keep this place healthy enough that it can sustain, generation upon generation of reincarnation. So in some ways, the initiatory experience forged the soul's confidence in its eternal life and in its freedom and in its creative power. And it allows for a break in this closure of signification as well. Because a whole new realm of meaning opens up when we realize that the sense-bound intellect isn't the end-all and be-all of our existence, that in fact there's a soul behind that, which in large part remains unconscious during life, that continues and that has more cosmic power, that it's inherited for billions of years than what our limited ego makes us believe. Let me see how much time I have here. Oh, good. So now let's get to Burning Man. Try to tie these ideas together. Burning Man takes place on Labor Day, and I think people go there for a vacation in large respects, to sort of be off the clock and to relax. But it's kind of funny though that they go there to be off the clock, and Burning Man is a giant clock. And I think this is sort of symbolic, where instead of time being a sort of oppressive structure that hems us in, it becomes a stage to play, and time becomes sort of mythic again, and it has this cyclical quality where you forget what day it is. Obviously from the cycle of the moon and the sun that the time is passing, but you don't care if it's Wednesday or Friday, or it doesn't matter anymore. You want to remember when the man's going to burn, but but that's pretty hard to forget. So there's this beautiful quote by a Jewish theologian Franz Rosenzweig. He says that in the struggle for time, state and art must destroy each other, since the state wishes to stop the flow of time, while art would drift in it. So the state, again, would be that oppressive authority which tries to maintain the closure of our systems of signification, whereas the artist is always trying to break free of any closure and just sort of play with time instead of feeling as though they have to work, as though they're on the clock. And and it's not, clock time in our industrial civilization has a lot to do with money too. Time is a measurement. It's used now as a measurement of money, of how much money we're being paid. And one of the most beautiful things about Burning Man, and in many ways one of the most shocking things about it, is that there's no money exchange on the playa, except for ice and coffee. So you can see that, as I said, this is hypercultural. It's not completely countercultural. Like, we need our coffee, and obviously you're in the desert, you need ice.
And all those profits are donated.
Yeah.
To the local communities.
Repeat that, please.
All those profits are donated to the local communities.
Mm-hmm.
The profits from the ice and the coffee are donated to local communities in Nevada, the school systems.
And there have been several dissertations written on what's happening at Burning Man. There's an anthropologist named Leigh Gilmore who recently published her dissertation. It's called Theater in a Crowded Fire, Ritual and Spirituality at Burning Man. And what she really argued in her dissertation was that this Burning Man provides that growing sector of society that identifies as spiritual but not religious, with an opportunity to participate in a collective ritual and to gain that same sense of a communal ethos that we've lost as traditional religions have fallen by the wayside. So it's both, there's three, basic principles that Burning Man, ethical principles that Burning Man tries to embody. One of those is radical inclusion, which is that communal element. One of them is self-reliance, which is, you want to be fully capable of being responsible for yourself at the same time that you're fully capable of holding everyone else's unique expression of who they are in mind. And it's amazing to watch at Burning Man how so many different people from different sectors of society with different types of day jobs, they come there to express their own unique understanding of what spirit is and of what spirituality is. And there's this beautiful temple structure that's built every year. It's always different. This year was the first year that the temple was taller than the man, way taller, 120 feet, and the man was, 60 or 70 feet. And I think this is symbolic. The culture that's being born in the Black Rock Desert is becoming more conscious of itself as some type of pilgrimage, some type of, I think, a prototypically American religious movement. And this was also the first year that the Burning Man Corporation transitioned into a nonprofit that's now located in downtown San Francisco around Civic Center. And they're going to start working to revitalize the urban setting there using art and sort of radical participation in the artistic regeneration of, the really degenerating sectors of San Francisco. I think they're really focusing on the Tenderloin and the Civic Center area. A lot of the art that was built on the playa is going to be moved into the city. You can already see that taking place. There's an cast iron statue of some flowers that's right at Civic Center now, and a beautiful statue of a dancing woman that's lit from within with this purple light that's on Treasure Island that you should go check out.
You could leak over a little bit, a few more blocks over to see, I guess.
Yeah. So I think, like this mythical city of Elsion, Burning Man is this dream that lasts temporarily, not quite just overnight, but, for several nights every year. And then it dissolves away again back into the desert. But I think the images, the social imaginary that is generated there in the souls of those who participate gets carried back into the world. And there's been some criticism of Burning Man for the way that it's become popular in recent years. It's ballooning. It's sold out for the first year ever this year, 50,000 people, and there's this growing phenomenon of what some bloggers I was reading have called P2P, pay to play, where rich people will just buy into these compounds of RVs that are stocked and staffed, and they're not really creating anything. They're just coming. They're paying to be there to see, the extravagance and the, to check out the scene without actually adding anything to it. So that's happening. But I think the more those kinds of people go, and if they keep coming back, I'm convinced that they will be transformed by that experience and realize that, I actually want to participate. I don't want to just pay to play. I want to help out. I want to be artistic, and I want to express myself. But in many ways, I think there are a lot of elements, perhaps the positive elements of capitalism that are coming to the playa and giving this arena to play in that isn't driven by money and consumption. It's driven by gift giving and participation.
Sorry.
Questions. Normally capital is defined as sort of profit that is skimmed off the top of the exchange that goes on in a society. And I think that there's a profit that each person gains at Burning Man. It's not monetary. It's a profit in a self-esteem that's generated. Questions? Okay.
Can you speak a little to the death, rebirth, continuity, in that sense of being cyclical that you have gotten out of Burning Man?
Yeah. Did everyone hear the question? You want to repeat it?
Can you speak a little to the death?
It's not on.
Oh, it's not on. Looks like it's on. Try again. Hello.
There you go.
Can you speak a little to the death, rebirth, sense of that continuity, of being cyclical that you've experienced at Burning Man, or that is created there, or that maybe even our group tried to create in some way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there are a lot of elements to how that comes out. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just being in the desert where you can fully take in the sky. Both, there's this polarization that takes place between the daytime, where the sun is the dominant element of your experience, and it's literally melting you, and contrast that with when the sun sets, all the stars come out, and the sky holds you instead of making you hide and run for the shade, but then you see this sort of connection between these. Between the daytime and the nighttime, and you really feel into that, the death and the rebirth of the sun, and how if it were always daytime, what an oppressive situation that would be, and yet the sun becomes something you really desire. I mean, it was kind of warmer this year, but last year it was really cold at night, and right before dawn is when it gets the coldest, and then you're praying out, calling out for the sun to return. And it's just, that sense of the paradox of mythical existence where, nothing really stands still, so you never feel like you're really fully getting what you want, but it's always coming, and that what you don't want will never stay too long. So there's that cyclical nature there. And the other thing is the boundary between the sacred and the profane is constantly being called into question. Burning Man, because on the one hand you'll have like this raging dubstep grungy music, and then you'll have this temple over here where there's beautiful chimes and gongs and people praying and chanting, and they exist side by side, and then there's, for me, the most spiritual experience I had there was the porta potties, actually, and the way that the spiritual heights are integrated with the intestinal depths, and just having to share these bathroom facilities with people, like you can see the karma working itself out as you wait in line. Who has toilet paper? Who remembered toilet paper? Who's giving toilet paper to those that don't have it? And it really sunk in that that's where it's real. That's where people's hearts truly come out. So yeah, just that mythical polarity between the sacred and the profane really comes out. And in terms of death and rebirth, I think the body is really brought to its extremes there, and you realize in some ways how important it is to maintain this incarnation, this incarnated body. You realize how needy it is at the same time, how easily its health is disturbed. So, yeah. Tom?
So it's just an observation more than a question, but it just struck me that Burning Man almost feels like a kind of staging of the original situation that the American people found themselves in.
It's the frontier, yeah.
In the sense that you're sort of alone in this hostile environment, and you have to learn self-reliance in order to survive. And it's almost like it has that quality of ritual to it almost.
Definitely.
In those days, what's happening is that you're sort of repeating the original challenges that you've faced in life.
Yeah. So I think there are so many beautiful elements to American culture that have been obscured by the sort of industrial and economic imposition, that sort of, in many ways it's an expression of those American principles, but in other ways it sort of denigrates them, and I think they need to be redeemed, and it's in a ritualized frontier setting like this, where you wash away commerce and money, and we're able to rediscover what it is that made America great, and, yeah. Becky?
So I don't remember if it was at Burning Man or beforehand we talked about Big Sur and different levels of consciousness, and you mentioned a lot of the mythical. Through this inquiry, do you feel like the mythical is more of what's present in the magical, like we did before? Or do you still feel like it's the blend of?
There's a lot of mythical, circularity and polarity there, as I was expressing Kat, but magic is fully present. Synchronicity, there's a synchronicity around every corner. But there's, the mental structure is fully present as well. This is as chaotic as it seems, this is a really well-organized event. This is a beautiful city grid that they construct in the desert before anyone's there. I don't know how, I guess they start on one side and work their way out, but, and there's a lot of organization behind the scenes, as Mikey could probably tell you. It's not, there's an order underlying the chaos, and so there's that mental element, and most of the people there are computer scientists, computer engineers, programmers, software engineers, and there are a lot of scientists there, and a lot of brilliant people that are, they're spiritual and not religious because they're so scientific, but they're, science has led them to the sacred in many ways. So, I don't want to inflate Burning Man too much, but it seems like, there's a transparency between all of these structures unfolding there that makes it somewhat integral. Sean?
Yeah, don't think I need this actually, but I'm hoping I get to experience Burning Man one day.
Yeah, me too.
I haven't yet. I'm wondering if you can say something about the shadow inside. We touched on it occasionally, but it's clearly Burning Man. Yes, it's creating something in the middle of the desert, which is, from a sustainability point of view, insane. Right? It could not happen without oil and money, and high tech and privilege. So it is like a castle built on
Sand.
Well, literally built on sand, and it's built actually also at a cresting wave before collapse.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a sort of shadow element there that I think a lot of people are aware of in terms of. There's a sort of shadow element there that I think a lot of people are aware of in terms of the apocalypse, the sense of apocalypse, and wanting to create a visionary alternative. But there is that. There are many elements of shadow, I would imagine, including just the self-reliance, yes, but they're totally dependent on oil and money and, and privilege, for one thing. I'm wondering if there are other shadow dimensions, like religion has its shadow, but many shadows. I'm wondering whether the spiritual, in this case, what are the shadow dimensions? Narcissism, what are they?
Yeah. Well, the major one I think that Burning Man has received a lot of criticism for is the ecological footprint. There are generators the size of houses used to power part of the main infrastructure. Many camps have their own generators, and this really sunk in last year, which was my first year, when I was sitting on the top of a bus and looking out over the playa, and every direction you look, there are giant explosions taking place, and all these art cars are, have kerosene tanks, and it's fire. It's all it's all about. It's in some sense about destroying things, which is an expression of this ideal of everything's impermanent and has a spiritual symbolism underlying it, but it's materially unsustainable for sure, and that's a big shadow. Burning Man has tried to do take some small steps. You know, they've installed a solar array in Burlock, which is the town that's about 10 or 15 miles south of the Black Rock Desert. But that's it's offsetting a minuscule amount of the carbon footprint. More and more people are taking RVs to the desert instead of building their own structure that, you know, isn't, you know, guzzling so much gas. You know, as far as narcissism and whatnot, in my experience, most of the people there are really able to balance the radical inclusivity and the communal aspect and the you know, witnessing others' creativity with their own desire to express themselves. So that really, that's not something that I noticed as a shadow element. You know, I think there's a leave no trace policy, and it's great to see that, you know, in the streets there's never any trash anywhere. If there's a piece of plastic blowing away from someone's camp, you know, the first person to see it will run after it and grab it. On Friday and Saturday night, the bathrooms, the porta potties get kind of gross. People leave beer cans in there and stuff. And I think that's kind of reflective of how there's this influx of people that come just to see the man burn on the weekend, that haven't been there for the whole week to see the communal ethos develop and really cement. And they're not as responsible as those who have been there all week. And so they'll get drunk and they'll leave their beer bottles and stuff in the bathrooms. But, you know, they're almost like tourists to this very temporary city, you know, so they don't take care of it as well as the permanent, you know, week-long residents. Yeah, there are shadow elements that need to be talked about.
Yeah. A quick question: did Plato see stars are our teachers or something like that? Is so you know
Where do you say that?
Yeah.
Epinomis, probably.
And in the laws too.
Yeah.
He refers to it in the laws. And he kind of, you're asking that makes me want to go back to the original and see exactly how he does it, because I think his deeper point is that the divine intelligence that informs the heavens and expresses itself through the heavens is what the human being in Philosopher's Quest, if we enter into that, participate in that divine intelligence, we become eternal as the stars are eternal. That's the but there is also this quality of the stars themselves being intelligent. You get it very strongly in Aristotle too, and in that sense they kind of take on like their teachers as well as the orchestrating intelligence. The nous, the divine nous, is the teacher. So if you're asking, this makes me want to look back and see exactly how he negotiates that monotheistic, polytheistic polarity.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he answered the question you did. I think we have one more. What time is it? Go ahead. Hurry up.
Well, I don't know if it's important to you, this distinction you made about it's spiritual but not religious. It flashed through my mind that it is a community, it has a sacred space, it has lots of private language, it has transformation of consciousness, it has a shadow.
Yeah.
And I can name about 8 other elements that you mentioned, all of which are characteristic of religion.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that anthropologist Leigh Gilmore, who I mentioned, said is that we have to redefine how we think of religion. Let me find where she said it and then bring this to a close. Well,
I just wanted to raise the question.
It's true. I think you're right about that. Well, the idea was basically, instead of thinking of religion as being defined by dogma and belief, Burning Man is pointing out to religious scholars that religion can also be embodied through through practices, through experiences that aren't necessarily codified, that aren't written down. You know, if you ask people on the playa, like, what is this about? Why do you burn the man? Like, what's going on at the temple? Everyone will give you a different answer, because what's taking place is on the level of unarticulated experiences.
Sounds like the first 30 years of Christianity, but that's another topic.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks.
Thanks again, Matt.
Thanks. Thanks, man. That's successful.